On this episode, we update everyone on the AI landscape and take our best guess on where we think things are going next.
Welcome to the show, where AI takes the floor. Leah Rich on the mic.
Welcome to the AI Guys podcast, where we make artificial intelligence easy to understand for everyone. I'm your host, Lee Dixon, and as always, I'm joined by Sam Altman's preferred emergency contact, Rich Swire.
It's a little known fact. I was hoping you wouldn't tell everybody that.
Yeah, sorry, man.
Yeah.
Cat's out of the bag.
But he hasn't called me yet, but I'm here waiting for you, Sam.
Yeah, he's waiting for the next big model drop, and then he's going to shoot you a text and be like, Rich, you up? I got to talk.
Catching that $6 billion check right now if he needs help. Spending it.
Spending it. We know somebody that can. But it's I did not just make that joke just for our normal like back and forth. We actually today are going to be updating everyone on some of the current landscape in AI, and then I think taking some shots on what we believe is coming next and when. So you ready to get into it?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So a little bit different than normal episodes. We're going to focus today on diving into really a handful of topics, and just, some might be a little shorter than others, but let's start off first with OpenAI. Obviously they've been at the forefront of everything that's been going on for the last, couple of years now, and recently raised a bunch of money, obviously deploying a bunch of new models over the last few months, and really starting to gain some traction, I think, as maybe not the front runner, since there's a lot of other people in the race, but definitely somebody who's focusing a little bit more on trying to integrate into businesses directly. So what do we think is on, maybe the menu for them coming up?
Yeah, I think OpenAI, is kind of the one that everybody's following and monitoring as far as the pathway, to, at a minimum, kind of the where AI is going to permeate our personal and business lives. But, obviously their tagline is, the path to AGI. Although, I think there's probably some more now disagreement that that's their focus than ever before. And I think it's also a contributing factor to, over the last few months, why you see a lot of their top tier people leaving the company. And my guess is that over the last 3-4 months, specifically right around when ChatGPT became, the fastest growing application in the history of the internet, is that Sam, his background is, he is a pure entrepreneur. He ran YC Combinator for a while and, or Y Combinator for a while. And he's very, I think more monetary focused, more about building a business,
Yeah.
And I think that story's kind of been laid out over time. And I'm guessing that when he was kicked off the company board, that was probably the beginnings of that.
One of the
split.
Reasons that
because,
started.
We started as a nonprofit. Its goal was to, create safe AGI. And it was more of a research oriented thing. But quickly, I think they found out two things. And this is nothing against Sam, but so I don't want to dump on him since I'm his emergency contact. But, I think they realized two things which made it very difficult to choose what path to go down. One is that building these models, training these models is extraordinarily expensive, right? Yeah. And you can't go out as a nonprofit and be like, hey, save the whales and I need billions to train a new model. It just doesn't correlate well.
Sure.
And even though most of their money, granted, like Elon Musk and a lot of big hitters, donated basically to the cause. Are now looking back and going, oh, maybe that was a flawed starting point. And now they're obviously trying to transition into a private company.
Yeah.
So I think this is really the story that I think is one layer beneath what you read in the news, which is OpenAI is certainly hyper-focused on becoming a multi-trillion-dollar company. They want to be one of the big 7 or 8 that exist, alongside Google's and Microsoft's of the world.
Yeah.
They certainly are doing everything to go private so that they could almost immediately go public. So
that
they
kind of a little
could
backwards there, but it works.
So they could raise the kind of capital they need to compete. $6 billion is not going to get them to where they need to be, but it's for all intents and purposes, a nice bridge loan. To getting them there. And I don't think, honestly, AGI is really their primary focus. I think AGI is kind of that vision that everybody has in their mind of what the, I guess, finish line is. But honestly, I'm not even sure anybody really agrees on that's the finish line anymore, because nobody really can define it. Everybody's actually kind of departing away from that definition. So I think
Mhm.
actually OpenAI is more focused on what's the best strategy of putting their product inside of the businesses and of course inside our phones.
Yeah.
And they've done a pretty good job of coordinating that to date, with the idea that there's a lot more money to be had in application of AI versus AGI right now. And they need that path in order to survive and compete and be relevant. So as
Yeah.
much as I think everybody's thinking, oh, we're on this fast track to AGI, I think it's slowed down dramatically with this new shift and the inertia that comes with that, which is we're going to build a real business. We're not going to be solely focused on research, and we're going to ultimately compete head to head with the big guys on this kind of, I think, bigger pot of gold than AGI right now, which is how do I dominate the desktop? How do I dominate the workspace? And how do I make sure my AI is the platform that a majority of businesses and people are using? And I think that currently is the OpenAI path that I'm seeing.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I think the shift away from AGI as being the focal point, obviously, they've got the adoption now. So it's not necessarily like, this is what we said, so we have to take that path. I do think that looking at it from the business standpoint, they definitely are seeing, the dollars and cents, which obviously drives everything. But they're moving away maybe from this dream of AGI more into like general intelligence application, trying to be at the forefront of, if you have a application that needs to be powered by AI, we want either all of it or at least enough of that pie to keep us like in that top category. And I think that is going to be more of their play in the future, just is really focusing on obviously driving revenue and how they want to shift this business from, where they were to where they want to be, but really going after this, you already know us, you already love us, let's keep the train rolling, versus, someone peeling off that and trying to go over to some of these other models that do have their own fan groups and are definitely, gaining traction in the space, but might be a little bit more niched or at least a little less trusted than OpenAI has from just the story they've created.
Yeah. And I would go one further just to make some bold predictions. I think they want to, as aggressive as they've been trying to go after the biggest mountain on the hill, which is Google search, and trying to transition OpenAI into more of that experience. And you've seen subtle changes even just in their UX recently that could be comparative to Google's homepage. But I think they're gonna, I'm guessing in the next 6 months they're going to be probably releasing their own browser. I think that's an element that nobody's really thinking about. And there's a variety of reasons to do that. And we'll talk about it a little bit later in the show around how Anthropic is starting to integrate with the desktop. And I think owning the browser is a interesting angle to doing some more things than you normally would within the browser that you could take control over. And also, I think generally it's a smart move. And I think they're also going to start deploying an app workspace. I think that's like their next big thing. I mean, more money is made in Microsoft Office and in Google Workplace and all these different applications. And that's one area where I could totally see how an AI first mentality could really, for the first time, put a dent in that kind of dominance. And I guess we'll talk more about that later in the show too when we talk about Google. But those two areas is where OpenAI, I mean, look for in the next 6 to 12 months where a lot of their resources, a lot of their investment's going to go toward. And again, this again tells the story of why, the CTO left recently, a few of the co-founders left, because you can imagine around the boardroom, Sam is pitching his vision, and his vision is we're going to have a browser, we're going to have a workspace, we're going to compete with Google Mail, we're going to compete with Microsoft Word. And they're sitting there going, oh, well, what happened to our vision of AGI? And then, of course, he's going to try to spin it and say, oh, well, AGI is still there, guys. And, I mean, these
are stepping stones to get there.
Yeah, it's a vision, but it's not, it's the stepping stones. We have to build a business here. And I honestly think that's why most of them left, because it's not it's not that Sam's like a hard person to work with, or maybe he is, but that doesn't necessarily stop people from working with you. I mean, you left the most dynamic company in the world for a reason. And the only reason I could foresee anybody, especially at the executive level, leaving a top tier, most amazing,
desired position in company right now
would be because they feel like the vision is taking a full like 90-degree return.
Yeah.
And because then it becomes less. I mean, if you're a CTO of AI and it's hot right now, and you're like, I don't want to sit here and build Excel, out of AI. That's not my thing. I want to build AGI. So I think that's what made them leave.
Yeah, could be. And we cracked a joke a little bit earlier today, not on the podcast, but I mean, if you bring back top 8s and you give me the ability to customize my GPT with songs like MySpace used to be, this entire generation is going to be all in on OpenAI. Sam, just let me know. I got more of these cooking. But yeah, exactly.
Get Tom and Sam together, and who knows what will happen.
Oh God, what a duo. I want to make sure we earmark some of these hot takes and come back 6 months later and look at.
No, these are guaranteed. These aren't hot takes.
These are guaranteed. Book it right now. If you guys can place a bet somewhere, like this is where it's going. Well, we're gonna move right into, you kind of already foreshadowed a little bit with Anthropic. So they've obviously taken a little bit of a different approach going to market and where they've tried to find their product market fit. But with this whole AI taking control of your computer, what is that about? I've done a little bit of knowledge, I've had a little bit of knowledge on this, but Anthropic's one of the few that it's not that I take it out of sight, out of mind. It's just, it doesn't come into my day-to-day as much as it would on yours from the dev side. So just curious kind of what your takes are on what they've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think Anthropic is one of those interesting, fourth place type companies where they always have this unique approach, and they have a very different user experience, and they probably have a pretty solid group of users that absolutely love it, right?
Yeah.
And of course, every day that goes by, they're starting to lose ground because others like OpenAI or Google are featuring them out, right? They're just basically either copying them or creating something similar. Even recently, OpenAI put out Canvas, which is kind of like a ripoff, right? So as that becomes more and more of a difficult moat to build, I think these companies are looking outside of the box for different ways you can implement AI. And I think this idea of, quote unquote, taking over your computer, we've seen a few other companies do something like this where they're either navigating the web for you, filling out forms, maybe going through a shopping experience, or like Microsoft briefly talked a little bit about having this in their next version of Windows where it tracks everything you do, and then you can obviously query it based on that history. People got a little bit spooked out about that because it felt a little bit more Big Brother. But this scenario where Anthropic is essentially taking over your computer and you're directing the AI to walk through and do certain tasks is a little less kind of spooky in the sense that you're still in control. You're the co-pilot. But I've played with it a little bit, and it's still early days. And I can't really wrap my head around why somebody would use this at scale.
That's a great review there.
Yeah.
Why would you use this, Rich Swire?
1 star. But I can appreciate, I guess looking at it from a nerd tech research angle, it's super cool to see how AI can listen to input, like, go over there and open my calculator and take 45 times 9, right? And it does it. It goes in, opens the calculator, types it in, and hits enter. Probably not at the speed as if I just did it. So, and if I'm still there directing it, it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily make things efficient, right? So we're not talking about an autonomous agent that's doing it on my behalf. So if it could do it on my behalf,
more of an augmented agent in that regard.
Yeah, so it's almost like I'm directing it and kind of walking through, and so it's less of delegation, it's more of mimicry. But I can see they wanted to release something and put it out there to be the first. This is the problem with AI in general, is all these companies are releasing these half-baked features that just because they want to be the first to showcase it. Yeah. But it doesn't really move the needle as far as like, oh, this is a game changer, right? But it's nice that we're
it's the look over here. It's the look over here feature. Like, hey, stop paying attention to what you're already used to, right?
Yeah.
Come over, check this out, and hoping that there's going to be a couple people that stay.
Yeah, and then maybe if they feel like people start to kind of embrace it or like it, or if it gets some buzz, then maybe they put more energy or R&D budget behind it. But I mean, I can probably see. I mean, I have 2 takes on it real quick. One is this is just kind of where they think that interfacing and taking control over a computer using obviously speech as a primary driver is a very interesting use case of showcasing how we can make existing computers and existing interfaces work. So I think it probably might evolve into something a little bit more useful, which would be, let's say, one of the challenges with AI over the next few years is going to be, how do we integrate AI into the existing ecosystem, the existing app ecosystem? Because that's pretty much where we all live, right? If you want to order food on Uber Eats, I open an app, I go through 4 or 5 screens, I hit go, and I pay, and I'm done. If I want to order a car on Uber, I do the same thing. If I want to, any app, just name the app. Expedia, I want to book a plane ticket, I got to go through a few screens, fill out some forms, and hit enter. So there's only really 2 ways that you can make AI create an autonomous agent or a co-pilot agent that understands how to go out and make those transactions happen. One would be an API directly into the back end of those systems, which may or may not be available.
Flipping levers.
And it does require a lot of complexity that may or may not be worth it. And maybe there's a small number of apps that will tie that in, and OpenAI and others will go and negotiate those deals. But there's probably a million other apps that aren't going to get the attention of OpenAI. So,
well, that could be the position of Anthropic here, just in your scenario,
screen grab,
right? Is like
walking through form fills. Right.
Go to all those enterprise apps and say, look, this is something you're going to want. We already have it built. You white label it internally. Yeah. This is our cost point. And then they've carved out their niche now where it's,
and
value add into these.
And I think maybe there's something that wasn't part of this release, but it's coming shortly, which is once I've done a process, let's say I open up a browser, I go buy a plane ticket, then it's teaching the AI that that's my process on how I buy a plane ticket. And that sequence of events, although it's going to change destination, time, all that good stuff, that sequence of events makes it smarter. And then maybe it prepares it to become more and more autonomous and more capable of doing tasks on my behalf. I think it's
asks you questions about, are you looking for the cheapest flight? Do you want to make sure it's nonstop versus connectors? And then from there just improves on knowing where your A to B goes. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah. And I feel like it's a little Betamax, I feel like it could be a red herring in the sense that that's not ultimately how it's going to work. I think, I think it's another example of how people are thinking about legacy and trying to, there's going to be this like middle area, this transition that we're going to have to adopt, as uncomfortable as it might be, to make AI work with existing app infrastructure until that app infrastructure grows up and decides to embrace AI in its fullest, which really is a big philosophical decision they have to make, because that means they're throwing away their user experience, and that's 99% of their value. So to be determined.
Yeah. Well, another good transition into, why would you use it? Hey Jen out there, is really focused around having these like video avatars that, can do certain things. But there's been a significant push on training these online avatars to have them do interviews, meetings, and all of this. I mean, in a world where our time is already limited as far as like what meetings do we want to take versus not. And then just literally, I don't know about you, but if I had booked a meeting with somebody and then a avatar shows up and was like, yeah, Rich wasn't available, I'd be like, this is bull. Like, you know what I mean? Or you
would just pull up your avatar and just have
exactly. I send mine in and I just let them talk, So where do you think that this kind of technology in this video avatar AI type space, does it really have a placehold in, I guess, near term uses, or is this really just sci-fi being wrapped up as, check this out, this is something you want?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I kind of look at this video avatar mindset as almost like the Cybertruck of AI, right? Like when you first see it, you're just like, oh man, what a cool looking truck. And then
I definitely didn't do that.
well, like
but
for the first 5 seconds, okay, give it, I mean, you were like, oh, that's different. That's
I
cool.
saw it and I went, oh, that's something from like Halo and on the original Xbox.
Right. That's my point. Yeah. So my point is like you have this like
a video game thing looking in real life. So I get it. Yeah,
exactly. But then you kind of go, oh, not sure that's going to work. So
yeah, fair.
I think that's similar to any video avatar. Is when you first see it, you're like, okay, I get it. It's the AI is making the lips move. It's not like they've got gestures and things like that make it more human, but it's very obvious. And maybe it'll get better over time, but it's extraordinarily difficult.
Deep fake is where it is. I can't imagine that AI is far behind.
Yeah.
Just
there's a difference
tech,
between, I mean, you're generating a video is doable. Like you can generate a really good video, render it, upload it. And that's where kind of deep fakes scare me because those can be very, very good. The real time stuff is a lot more complicated because you're rendering real time. And as if anybody knows about video, it takes a lot of processing. So what they've done is they've kind of, they've really all they're doing is rendering the lips real time. And they're kind of it's kind of like this circular motion around the human. So you could see after you see the person tilt their head a certain way a couple times, like the same motion. You're
it's
like,
somewhat looped. Yeah,
exactly. And obviously the lips are never really timed up well, but despite all that, even if it's the most amazing realistic video you could ever see, I question kind of what the actual, use cases here, because what it feels like to me is that we're reverting to the mean very fast. And what I mean by that is that AI talking to AI is kind of the assumptive next step, right? So, my AI is processing autonomously information related to my job, and then it communicates with your AI to get feedback it needs in order to continue to do the next process, right? So I could totally see where that's going to revert to the mean. Most of it behind the scene, but even within a chat perspective, I could see use cases where an AI, I go onto the AI right now, I go, hey, book a time to meet with Lee tomorrow. And he goes, okay, no, wait, hold on. Let me go talk to Lee's AI calendar, right?
And see if he's available.
And let's see if he's available too. Oh, yeah, he is. Okay, great. So that is like a use case I could totally see, right? AI talking to AI for sure. And humans talking to AI is obviously a use case. That's what we're doing today. Where the video thing kind of loses me is that there's only really, I think, a handful of use cases where it could be scalable and very usable. And I'll give you one example. I won't completely bash it because we use it internally to generate training videos. Obviously, that's not real time, but it's rendered video. But we use an AI service that renders a human that talks about, how
to use the account and like where to go and just general
and it adds
specifics.
Like an interesting, cool little element to it. Gives some visuals. Instead of having a human do it, because you would have to have take one, take two, they would always flub up a word. It's costly. You'd have to have a crew. You'd have to have makeup. I mean, it's a nightmare. So having a human element to a video is an absolute, and I think that's what drew people to these type of companies. But the long game here, as far as real time, kind of what they call, I think Zoom or one of the other companies. What do they call it? A copy? No, they don't call it a copy. But anyway, digital twin. They call it a digital twin.
Yeah, there you go.
So this concept of digital twin is certainly, I think it's really a very big leap for what humans are willing to really engage with. Like you just said, if I logged on and there was a digital twin, I would just hang up. No different than when you get a robocall. No different than why people don't use Alexa or Siri at the scale that they originally thought. Is because I do think that there is a hurdle that very few people are willing to take the energy to overcome. When talking to a machine, which seems counterintuitive because everybody's a buzz, right? OpenAI's big demo a couple months ago was talking to the phone.
But it could also be generational, right? If a Hey Gen or an Anthropic are looking at this as like, oh, well, I'm going to open this app and do it anyways. So unless you're going to do this piece for me, is it really worth the time? The generations as they start to shift are just like, I'd rather have a digital avatar that now plugs into, let's say, my Anthropic workflows and knows everything about all this stuff. And just like if I have, I'm thinking of like pushing a button and being like, hey, assistant, this is, I need you to take care of a couple of these things today. Like I've got an anniversary coming up, so I want to buy flowers. I need to buy plane ticket for my family to go here, and I need to make a lunch meeting with Rich. And it's like, cool, I'm on it. And then I just go about my day doing the other things, and it comes back and has that. Now, is that where both of these companies really think they're going? Probably not.
Probably
but
not,
to me,
that scenario
to me,
for sure is what everybody wants. I don't think you need a video avatar.
I don't either.
Yeah, nor do you need really much else, really. I mean, the voice component, the speech to text and driving the prompt, that makes a lot of sense.
That's a much bigger movement to me than.
But even that, like, I wouldn't want
to
to talk to my AI for more than, after giving it instructions. I'm not going to sit there and have like long discussions with it today.
Yeah.
Now,
sure.
10 years, 20 years, 30 years, as you mentioned, generationally, like I'm sure my grandkids would much prefer talking to an Android, robot that's, once it's evolved into what it becomes and it has a personality and it's actually more entertaining, probably much rather talk to a robot than me. So I don't think it's completely out of the question that these things will come together in some form or fashion. I just don't know if it's a two-dimensional video that people are going to use today, right?
Yeah.
So, but something to watch. I think video and voice are to be determined. I think we'll see a lot of those things get better and better over the next year, but we're still early days.
Yeah. So going from a handful of AI providers that are focusing on maybe not singular, but very specific applications to one of the big dogs, Google, really starting to see AI popping up in all of their tools, which, can still have some limitations, but I think they're, dropping the bag and just trying to expose it everywhere they possibly can is a much bigger shift than we all were probably expecting a couple months ago. So how do you feel like embedded AI in a workflow like Google, a workflow like Microsoft is really going to play out versus trying to like swim against that current?
Yeah, it just shows you, even though there's only a handful of major players in this space, how each one of them have such a unique, different kind of take on how we're going to adapt AI, right? Like, obviously, ChatGPT is completely in our face, right? It's a single user point of view. You log into it and you go there instead of what you used to do, which is go to Google search, right?
Yeah.
And then you have Anthropics of the world that have these very unique, value propositions. And then, of course, these kind of single apps, like you mentioned, HeyGen and others. When it comes to Google, it's really about, they have such a massive ecosystem, right? Google Docs, Mail, Drive, even their search. And I think this idea of kind of embedding these kind of little micro AI agents inside of those tools, it's a very interesting approach because one, those AI, even though it's called Gemini, they're all very much trained to work in context with that tool. So, if you need help with if you're on Google Sheets and you need to calculate something, or you need some help figuring out a different, something within your sheet that you don't understand how exactly to do it, you can actually ask AI and it'll help you build out that for you. And then same thing goes with Google Docs. You can review a document, have it spell check it, or have it rewrite something if you want to rewrite something. So it all makes sense to have those like little tools, one click away embedded in your software. I definitely think it's the low hanging fruit, and probably where a lot of the use is going to be over the next, couple years is going to be in these like little add-ons, these little plugins. If as far as how people use them in their day-to-day work. Yeah. And so it'll be interesting to see how that adoption and how that usage compares with what I would call a pure play AI first, OpenAI. I go to ChatGPT, I could take that document, upload it into ChatGPT, and I could ask it to do certain things to it. So I don't know exactly where the user behavior is going to ultimately fall, right?
Yeah.
And if it tends to fall more with the existing ecosystems, like Google's and Microsoft's, then that only makes me want to double down on my bet that OpenAI is going to invest heavily in building out their own Office suite and their own email suite and their own browser. Because they might already know that that's their biggest competitor. Because
that's fair.
If it's going to be embedded, and you could argue that they've already kind of taken a step toward that with their their recent release of Canvas. If you haven't played with Canvas, it's very similar to Claude and what it does, but I mean, it does it a little bit different, a little bit better in some aspects. So I already think that they're already kind of laying out the foundation that's going to be, we need to have all this, we need to have all these applications and the functionality of these applications, but take an AI first mentality, because I don't know if you remember using Excel back in the day, right? Like where there was like 1,000 buttons at the top. You know what I'm talking about? Like,
before, the toolbar was all
it was just like 5 toolbars, and they just got every time you upgraded, it was like another toolbar. Like, what is going? And you only really use like 3 of the things.
Yeah, our new version with 4 more toolbars.
And then when
damn,
and then when Google Sheets came out, you're like, oh, it was so simple and so clean, and it was so, and then Microsoft had to bring theirs to the cloud, and it still was clunky. But but what you've seen over the last 10 to 20 years with SaaS and moving things to the web is everything that used to be somewhat complicated with a lot of menus, a lot of buttons, has gotten simpler and simpler and simpler. And so it would make sense that the next step is AI is going to make it even more simple, right? Because you don't need all these buttons, because you can just tell the AI, yo, I need this. You don't need a button that opens up a whole menu system for you to tell it that you need to write a script or create a new calculation or embed this kind of format or whatever. You can just tell the AI and it automatically will do it. So I don't know. I think that's the game to watch, is this idea of plug-in, embedded AI inside of these applications and OpenAI and product roadmap. And I think it'll be very telling, because, when people keep talking about OpenAI going after Google for search, and although I do agree with that premise, nobody's really ever going to be able to really beat Google at their game on their field. So my guess is that OpenAI is basically saying, listen, people are going to come to us for quote unquote search anyway. We don't have to like look and feel. They're not going to want to look and feel like Google. That doesn't make any sense. They're not going to have the top 10 results ads on the right. That makes 0 sense, because they're not going to beat them at that game. But what they will beat them at the game is like, well, if people are coming to us to search for some, do research, we can present it in a much better way without the clutter and force Google to basically figure out how they can minimize the damage that OpenAI is taking from them. So
their search will be very specific search, structure, rather than right now it's go Google it. Google might become just literally the consumer-based search when you're trying to find XYZ, and then OpenAI will have their more, like you said, research or and I mean, specific task oriented.
And I'm guessing the next six months, again, I'll make another bold prediction. Is that and this is already happening in other softwares. I think Anthropic's already doing it already. Is that they're going to start allowing you to buy certain prompts. So we're going to move away from AdWords, right? Search queries to prompts. Yeah. And then when somebody prompts what's the best restaurant in Atlanta for steak, that's a prompt that somebody can buy and be embedded in that result set. And in probably a much more contextual, much more friendly way, right?
Sure.
And it will obviously include maybe some ratings and some other things. So instead of me having to go to 4 or 5 different sources, Yelp, Google reviews, and Facebook reviews, and then come back to Google, and then all that, AI could certainly make that experience much more fluid. So I think there's so many moving parts here. And I think that was the goal of today's episode, was to kind of just take a lay of the land and see where everybody's trajectory is. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to also highlight in this episode, these ones in particular, is because they're all basically have a very different game plan in front of them, because they all are trying to protect what they have and also move forward with what they don't have, and try to figure out where they're going to have the most success without competing or losing. And that brings us to the last one, which is Apple, which is, I think, the most interesting one right now, because we just released, now Siri with ChatGPT embedded. And of course, this hasn't rolled out in full until their new phone is out, because they're pushing out their new chips across the entire product line this fall or this winter. So this is kind of the one sleeper that is going to, I think, really put a stake in the ground of where we are in how users use AI, right? So
it's weird having Apple be the one that's blazing a trail after the last 2 decades of, just kind of where they've been.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like in that space, it's strange that they weren't already in it. And I know we've talked about this on other episodes too, but Google is kind of the opposite, that they're spread so thin or so wide, I guess, that they don't have the defense on all of these different product sets. So it's like, man, we have to permeate AI to everything. So someone doesn't come in here and say, oh, well, I've got the AI that plugs into this. It's like, nope, we already got it covered. Apple just kind of like waited in the shadows until everyone started picking lanes, and then went very aggressively, I think, with what they're doing now.
Yeah, I think they're smart. I mean, we talked about this in past episodes where they basically said, listen, all these guys are spending billions of dollars on models. It doesn't do us any good to have a big model. We'll just use somebody else's. And eventually they probably made the bet and said, everybody's going to open source it anyway, right? So why spend all this money? Why get into that rat race? And they probably were hyper-focused on creating smaller models, because smaller models can live on the phone, on the device. And that's what they started building their own and their own chip to allow for that. And, their partnership with ChatGPT and even Google to some degree might be just a gap filler, and they might end up building their own at some point. But, it's like keep your enemies closer type thing, I think, with ChatGPT. Yeah. And ultimately, what I think will be determined over the next few months as we start to see how many people buy the phone, how they use it, and how Apple imagines AI working on the device, because we haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen that at scale. We have not seen AI on the phone embedded with the phone capability, because that's going to open up three things. It's going to open up the voice component dramatically, because you're much more natural talking to your phone. Now, OpenAI has their voice element to ChatGPT, but it's not a natural, it's not embedded, it's not part of the phone, it's not as natural, right? Talking to Siri
doesn't feel normal.
People are already talking to Siri, and Siri is very limited. So now they're just going to continue, they're going to talk to Siri more, right? That wasn't a behavior that ChatGPT had. And then the second thing is, the phone natively has integration with so much information that can make it a better personal assistant, right? And you can use it today with voice commands, right? Like, hey, call my mom or whatever. But the fact that it actually has authentication and access to things like a wallet, things like your travel itinerary, your calendar, your email, and assuming that you allow for it to engage with that information, that could open up a whole nother world of use cases that, quite honestly, ChatGPT can't touch on its own, because it doesn't touch all those elements that's on your phone. It's a firewalled in some degree. And again, maybe that's why. I was going to say something Apple really does well, right? And what they've been doing for the last few decades is they understand a consumer story. They know how to get people using things when they make them, whether it's an app that is already an app on an Android phone. They're just like, yeah, but it's Apple now. And everyone's like, I'm over. Like, I got my iPhone right in front of me, but I know that they have the ability to tell a story that's going to get people to utilize it even more, which is only going to ramp up how quickly they want to do more stuff with it. And that's something, whether it's to Apple's credit or detriment, they've always been very focused on, is retaining the consumer versus allowing them to just like leave the ecosystem. Like, you're here, you're Apple, you're basically going to be for life unless you just are absolutely against us. I think it's just, and to end on that point, which is an excellent point you just made, I think this is truly the beginning of the second chapter. I think the first chapter of AI, was ChatGPT and the experience of ChatGPT and how it opened up everybody's eyes, what kind of ecosystem it created. And now the second chapter of generative AI and AI as we know it today is going to be this first time that it lives on the device, which we all know is connected to everybody's hand permanently. So whatever Apple kind of puts a stake in the ground and shows what's capable and how it works is going to be a driver of what's next, right?
It's going to shift the tide for sure.
Because the more people are using it in their hand and their phone, it's going to permeate back to people using it in their business. Adoption is going to accelerate dramatically. ChatGPT is going to have to kind of scramble to find its use cases, although most of its use cases today is very long form, and very engaging and long, long chats and things like that. So I think they're protected in that world, but they're going to obviously have to kind of react or respond to whatever the mobile user experience is going to be. So I'm excited to see that. And I think everything is kind of teed up for, the next three to 6 months to see where the battle continues, right? As we talked about in the past, is this Game of Thrones-esque element to AI. And, and it's scary to say, but it's only been a year or so since it started to become so topical
That's
and
true.
so common. So we'll have
Fast,
to
man.
update everybody, and once some of these things come to fruition, as I've foretold.
Yeah, we're gonna I'm saying we're gonna earmark these. We're gonna come back to it in a few months and see how on point it is. But I think we covered a lot today, and for everyone listening, thank you again so much for joining us on this episode. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button to stay in touch. Also, feel free to check out our Substack, which we have plenty of more content on there, and that'll be linked to this episode so we can continue this discussion. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everyone.
Takes the flow, Leah Rich on the mic, ready to explode.